dictatorship is better than a weak democracy. We define the term straight up as strong, efficient, meets the needs of the people, in other words satisfactory, and strict in its implementations. A dictatorship is basically a form of government that does not have a varying number of parties, only one party, and that holds no elections. Better, in other words, means that it is preferable or satisfactory. Then a weak means unstable, inefficient, is not satisfactory. Democracy is basically the opposite of dictatorship. In other words, it's a form of government that has parties and holds elections. Now, before we start, we have to make clear and we have to clear up any misconceptions that will be preemptively thought of or brought up by side opposition. Number one, we politely ask from side opposition to not bring strong democracies such as Canada, the United States, or any such things, and to not use arguments that apply to such governments. Because clearly, what the resolution is about, it's about strong dictatorships and weak democracies. In other words, if a strong dictatorship is brought and a strong democracy is brought up, and if you ask us to choose one of them, we choose the strong democracy. However, if a strong dictatorship is brought up and a weak democracy is brought up, we choose the strong dictatorship. In other words, we are not against democracy, however, weak democracies, and prefer a strong dictatorship over weak democracies. That's number one, and that's the first thing I'd like to clear up. Number two, and the first argument, is the sovereignty of the state. And we all know that in order for a state to be successful, to strive to excellence, and to be successful in all aspects, whether in the social aspect, military aspect, political aspect, the economic aspect as well, which is very important, the state must have sovereignty in all aspects. And therefore, a dictatorship is one of the best ways, or better than a weak democracy, regarding the sovereignty of the state. And if anybody may ask why, the reason is the dictatorship knows what it's doing, has one decision that it abides by, and knows its limits and knows the limits of others, puts a limit to everything, and therefore the people who are living under the strong dictatorship will know their limits, will think before they take any step, and therefore the sovereignty of the state internally is protected, not at this time, and therefore, unlike many arguments that state that dictatorship will promote the shedding of blood, this will indeed, as a strong dictatorship, reduce the shedding of blood when everybody knows the step that they are taking, thinks about it before, and think about the consequences that they will be subjected to if they act inappropriately. And that is internal sovereignty, where everybody knows their limits and everybody thinks in the way that they're supposed to think and do not commit any appropriate actions against their government within their borders. Yes?
What if the government goes overboard and they consider every small step as in going against their government or as in treachery, and there are unfair trials and human rights abuses within these nations?
Yes, that is the biggest stereotype, one of the overused cliche and stereotypes used against dictatorships. The thing is about the going overboard, unfair trials. It's hard to say. However, a strong dictatorship is not only strong in its implementation, it's strong in the way basically it thinks of its decisions and how it acts after actions have been made by its people. And therefore, if an inappropriate decision or action is committed by a person living under their rule, that person knew what they were doing. They know that they live under the laws and regulations and the protocols that have been set forth by that dictatorship, and therefore they should know what they are doing, and if they commit any inappropriate action, then they will be subjected to the suitable punishments that will be determined by the government in an appropriate way. And therefore, again, I say that the people have to know their limits under a strong dictatorship, because, again, just like maybe in Canada, you have laws saying I don't know is not an excuse. If you go over the speed limit and say I don't know, that's not an excuse, you get ticketed. The same thing in a dictatorship. If this is in a democracy where you don't have such an excuse, obviously in a strong dictatorship you won't have this excuse. Yes?
What if the dictator is taking this unsuitable action?
Pardon?
What if the dictator is breaking this law and taking the unsuitable action?
As I said, internally and within the borders, we're talking about now internal sovereignty, I'll go to external sovereignty. Everybody knows their limits in a strong dictatorship. If you are referring to a president or a leader that does not know his limit in a corrupt government, then that is not what we are talking about. We're talking about a strong dictatorship that knows its limits and teaches the people their limits and acts in a suitable manner against those who act inappropriately. Yes?
Can you name a dictator who hasn't taken these that haven't taken these steps in things such as human rights abuse?
Well, I ask another question. Give me one leader that did not make any mistake in their political career. That's a better thing to say, because you cannot say that every give me an example of a dictatorship that did this or did that, or give me the cliche thing about Hitler. Every political leader will commit mistakes, whether serious, minor, or major, not at this time. And therefore, I'll give you actually a very good example. If we take a look at the sovereignty of the Ottoman Empire before it was destroyed by the Western powers at the time of World War I. It was what we know today as a dictatorship. That's what that government represented. However, the Muslim subjects living under that empire did not oppose it by any means, and lived, they had a good financial status. They lived in a very good social status as well, and everybody knew their limits. And the government knew the limits of others. If anybody passed those limits from another country, or if a neighbor passed those limits, the empire would act against them. And what was not known as a dictatorship at the time, however, what we define as dictatorship would represent the Ottoman Empire at that time. There were no problems at all, no human right violations. The people lived, as they say, happily ever after, until they were killed by the Western powers. Yes.
Are you aware the Ottoman Empire fell because there were internal issues?
Yes, those internal issues were not sparked internally. The Western powers did not want a sovereign and strong dictatorship led by the Muslim Ottoman Empire, and therefore the Western powers sparked secular ideologies in Turkey and started many different sects, Turkish sects and parties that were secular in ideology. It sparked Arab nationalism, which contradicted the Islamic ideology of the Ottoman Empire, and therefore we can easily prove that this great Arab revolution, it is incorrect to call it an Arab revolution. It was basically a Western revolution against a bitter rival or a bitter enemy, and a very sovereign and strong enemy, and therefore they used the Arab Revolution as a puppet for them in order for them to reach their goals and to bring down that sovereign state. And therefore, that is the end of the first argument. Now, just to go on touch on the second argument, we'll finish it before the debate, hopefully. The thing about the decision-making process. In a weak democracy, you have different, numerous parties. Because since it's unstable, every person wants to vote their opinion, thinking that everybody can just go and be part of the government because of its instability. And as we see in Iraq, decisions are basically going slowly than ever. No decisions are being made in order to help Iraq. However, not that we support Saddam Hussein at all, regarding his many different abuses and all his inappropriate actions. However, if we take a look at his decision-making process, everything was implemented strictly and efficiently, and everything that was appropriate, which we believe was appropriate, was followed by all the people, because again they had internal, external sovereignty. Pardon?
15 seconds.
And therefore the dictatorship was successful. Relatively speaking, obviously, and therefore the decision-making process is very important. 15-second grace after that one. And if we take a look at the United States, which is a strong democracy, look how long it took until the healthcare came to this very modest stage, and that's a strong democracy. What about a weak democracy? What would the decision-making process would be at that point or in that circumstance? And therefore, we say again, in terms of decision-making processes, in terms of implementation, in terms of sovereignty, internal and external, we believe that a strong dictatorship is better than a weak democracy. Thank you.
Thanks the member for his comments.
Shaking them so hyper because they all are cooked.
It's a good thing she took it away.
Under one argument?
Dude, you gotta look at tiny on that.
Did you pause it?
Yeah, because
Was that an argument?